Welcome to National Parks Traveler, where we explore the national parks and the issues that involve them.
There are 423 units in the national park system, but a surprising number of people focus on only about 24 parks. Last year, when about 300 million people visited the national park system, just 25 units, the Yellowstones, Grand Canyons, Zions, Blue Ridge Parkways, the Cape Cods, got 50% of the traffic. This is Kurt Repenchek, your host at National Parks Traveler. There are so many overlooked units in the national park system that are definitely worthy of a visit. They may not be your final destination, but they're certainly worth becoming a destination on your traveling itinerary. Recently, I had the opportunity to tour 4 of these overlooked units. I started this audible road trip last week with my visit to Scotts Bluff National Monument in western Nebraska. Today's stop is at Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve in Kansas, an unusual park rich in both cultural and natural history. I'll be back in a minute with my walk through the tall grass with Ranger Eric Patterson.
Interior Federal Credit Union supports its members with some of the best rates in the country. Check out their new certificate rates and competitive loan rates at interiorfcu.org. Set your money aside for a specific period of time and maximize your earnings with terms up to 60 months and a minimum opening deposit of $500. Bump-up certificates are also available to increase your rate once during the certificate's term. Ready to start saving? Apply at interiorfcu.org. Since 1986, national park visitors have turned to the best-selling guidebook Passport to Your National Parks to collect fun ink stamps from each of their explorations. Just take your passport book to any national park visitor center or park store and get your free ink stamp with the date and location of your visit. Personalize your passport even more by adding stickers, logging your favorite hiking trails, and mapping your next adventure. You can also show off your love for our national parks with passport-themed apparel and accessories. Best of all, 100% of proceeds from the Passport program support your national parks. Stamp your passport as you capture stories, preserve memories, and discover America's natural and historical treasures. We all aspire to leave a legacy of good, right? One way or the other, our parks and public lands are all of our legacies. Join Wild Tributes for the Parks community with apparel that pays tribute to where legacy roams. Together, we can and will make a difference for the parks. Join us at wildtribute.com. The Everglades Foundation, the only organization whose sole mission is to restore and protect America's Everglades. Learn more at evergladesfoundation.org. The Grand Teton National Park Foundation is a private, nonprofit organization that supports projects that protect and enhance Grand Teton National Park's cultural, historic, and natural resources. By funding initiatives that go beyond what the National Park Service could accomplish on its own, Foundation donors improve the visitor experience and provide benefits to the National Park System for decades to come. See their successes at gtnpf.org. Acadia National Park is one of the 10 most popular national parks in the United States. It is also one of the smallest and most vulnerable. That is why Friends of Acadia exists. Friends of Acadia is an independent organization of passionate people inspiring those who love this magnificent park to make a real and lasting difference for Acadia. You can make a difference at friendsofacadia.org.
All right, Kurt Repenchek at Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve with Ranger Eric Patterson, and we're going to take a walk on the Southwind Trail and try and get a little understanding of what exactly the Tallgrass Prairie is and what there is to see here at the preserve. So Eric, why don't we take a walk down this trail, and you can tell me a little bit about the Tallgrass Prairie, maybe a little bit of history of the preserve, and what people can find here.
All right. Thank you for taking the time to find us out here. Anyone could find Yellowstone in Yosemite, and I highly recommend it, but in my head, it takes a true believer to find your way to a place like this in the middle of Kansas, which for many people is just something you drive through on your way to a Yellowstone or a Yosemite or a Rocky Mountain. But we have things to see and do here that are perhaps a little different than what you may have come to expect from a national park. It's a very cerebral place. We have no Grand Canyons or Grand Tetons here, but we have Grand Prairie. We have 10,894 acres of prairie land with maybe 30 to 40 miles of hikeable, walkable trails, all of which are available 24 hours a day. Camping, though, is not a use that is accommodated out here, but there are places near the park that have camping availability. A state park about 8 miles away, free camping, a state lake.
Well, I was kind of disappointed about that, Eric. I mean, you've got all this prairie, beautiful tallgrass prairie. Why not carve out a little campground?
Well, I suppose that would be a question for our partner organization, the Nature Conservancy. It's a unique arrangement between private nonprofit and public federal land management agency, the Park Service. 11,000 acres rounded up, 17 square miles does sound like a large area, but when you start adding in the things you want to do on it and the things people would associate with a national park, all the recreational activities and all the natural resource management activities, all of the land management experimentation and demonstration we're trying to do here, 11,000 acres gets pretty small.
Yeah.
And I think initially when the park was envisioned, it was seen as not necessarily a one-stop shop for all of your tallgrass prairie recreation needs. It was seen more as a catalyst, as a spark for perhaps others to take up the torch and build upon the park's presence, because the Flint Hills themselves are some of the last remaining landscape level stands of tallgrass prairie, but the vast majority of those acres are not open to the public.
Right.
They so the park was seen as a way to kind of funnel that growing public interest into a place where, you don't have to know the landowner necessarily to you just come on out, because in a sense you're the landowner. It's a public place. So
Well, and as you mentioned, there's not a lot of tallgrass prairie left in America, is there?
no, there is not. The general consensus, or the number that I present to folks, is 4% of the original range. So now you're making me do math, and that's tough on a Monday morning. But 170-ish million acres is thought to have been in North America. One of the three types of tallgrass prairie. Tallgrass, mixed grass, and shortgrass prairie make up the Great Plains. Whew. But 170 million of those are tallgrass, and now that's down 4%. So I guess you can do the math there. What's 4% of 170 million? I think that's about 6.
I'll let you do the math.
Oh, there
I'm
you
not
go,
very
yeah.
good at math.
That's why I got into this business. I'm all about the talk. Yeah.
And what's the difference between the tallgrass prairie and the shortgrass prairie? It's late June here, coming up on July, and some of this vegetation might be a couple foot tall, but some people might say, well, that's not very tall.
I think it's primarily weather / climate. I know they're not the same, but it's a function of moisture primarily. The Rocky Mountains kind of wring out the moisture moving from west to east, and as weather systems move to the east, they begin to rainfall again, and you might see about 10 inches of rainfall in the high plains of western Kansas, which I think you gain. I think I read in You gain 1 inch for every 20 miles west, roughly. So, and that kind of works out because 10 inches on the Colorado border, you get 1 inch every 20 miles. By the time you reach the Flint Hills, you're up to about 35 inches on the average, and that's over 50 years. That's a long average. I mean, you can have periods of drought. You can have periods of moisture. You can have everything in between. It's a highly variable bit of rainfall out here, but the ground is pretty good at absorbing moisture. Tall grass roots, that's another thing a lot of people ask, like, I heard your roots go 20 feet into the ground. Is that true? And like, well, in some places where there's plenty of, like, soil material, you might get deep runs of roots. But out here, the rockiness of the terrain keeps the roots closer to the surface and spreads them out along the top, so they all tangle together like steel and concrete and hold the soil together and creates a spongy mass.
So the roots of the rebar.
The roots of the rebar, yeah, there you go. Nice little bit of alliteration there. I like it. But the roots are the rebar, and we can go the whole way around, or we can double back.
Oh, let's go the whole way.
All right, cool.
A little exercise on Monday.
That's it, yeah,
get
get
going.
our steps in, that's good. But, so yeah, moisture is kind of the big driver, and the relationship. I mean, that's just one leg of the tallgrass prairie. I like to say there are 3 more, like the legs of a stool or a table. You got moisture, you got fire, and then grazing. And then the 4th leg, or the wild card, is human activity affecting. And so in an ecosystem, when everything is balanced, the table stays upright. But if one, in a 3-legged environment, moisture, fire, grazing would kind of balance with one another, maintaining equilibrium in the ecosystem. If, say, it got dry, the plant life wouldn't grow as well, the grazing animals wouldn't graze it as much, they'd go somewhere else, which would then rebalance when moisture returned, the animals would come back, or say fire burned an area, that would draw the grazers in, that sort of thing. A lack of fire over a few years might discourage grazing. So, but then human activity kind of upsets things a little bit, or adds an unpredictable variable to the equation. Oh, a fritillary, a regal fritillary, the buffalo of the butterfly world, right there.
What's he perched on?
Butterfly milkweed, very, very appropriate there.
Nice bright orange.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So monarchs love the butterfly milkweed as well. One of the big kind of public relations kind of efforts is to encourage butterfly-friendly environments, because monarchs are very kind of out there. People know what monarchs are, and they're getting more familiar with the amazing migration they do.
Right.
And what can happen when their main food source is kind of disappeared. Yeah, I mean, without and this is kind of, it's not like they can go to another part of the smorgasbord. Butterflies, especially monarchs, are drawn to the butterfly milkweed. And,
so this isn't a monarch. What is this?
A regal fritillary. Regal fritillary. It was featured on the 2020 quarter.
Oh, really?
For Kansas, the Public Lands series that just wrapped up a couple years ago. Kansas Tallgrass was one of the last national parks of that series.
I mean, it's just beautiful the way it's just, he opens up his wings and you got that bright orange and the black on the inside and kind of a white spotted on the outside.
Yeah, it's, oh, cameras, where's my cameras? So,
you guys have a nice maintained trail, so to speak. I mean, it looks like you cut the grass through the Tallgrass Prairie here, and you're talking about the 3-legged stool, or the 4th leg if you bring in the human equation. Now, on the other side of the preserve, you've got the bison.
Correct. Yeah.
They don't get over here into this tallgrass prairie. You don't cycle them through here to.
Not through here. There's a specific area of the park that is maintained for their needs. It's a 2 square mile area of the park. 1,100 of those acres are a large pasture we call the windmill pasture, and then there's another 200 acres that was just recently made available to the bison to hopefully encourage them to kind of get a little more space and actually graze a little more toward the lower Fox Creek Schoolhouse, where there's a parking area and people might be able to get a glimpse of the buffalo or of the bison, because their primary duty here is not necessarily, to sing and dance and to be on display, although that is pretty cool when you can lay eyes on one of those giant beasts. But their primary mission is to maintain the species, to reproduce.
To be bison.
What's that?
To be bison.
To be bison, yeah. Eat, sleep, and make little bison. That's sounds pretty awesome. Good work if you can get it, I suppose. But so they're maintained a little deeper inside the park to kind of facilitate that. And but the public can still hike through the buffalo pasture. There won't be anything between you and them, so good behavior on your part is encouraged, recommended, because they are curious animals too, and they will investigate your activity if it doesn't match with what they've come to expect.
Well, I'm kind of curious too, because obviously we know in Yellowstone National Park, the visitors seem to think that the bison are tame, and some of those visitors get a little bit too close to the bison, which take exception and gore them and throw them in the air or whatnot. Do you ever have any incidents here with the bison and the human equation?
We have not. Knock on wood. I mean, I guess we've had some close encounters. Some of our natural resource staff just out there doing their thing, not encouraging misbehavior, but just out there on UTVs doing their research, maintaining proper distancing. But nature is random, full of probability that can't be predicted, and sometimes the bison might take offense or start to kind of demonstrate demonstrate that yes, we see you. We're not exactly cool with what's going on, but we'll keep you in our radar screen, and please mind the raised tail and the stomped feet, and go on about your business, and we'll all be better for it. So
yeah.
We try to educate the public with please give them their.
Get a little chorus of birds watching us there.
They're listening to us. Yeah, cowbirds, I think, or a couple of them anyway.
Yeah.
Got a dick sissel there. I think a couple of cowbirds. I'm not sure what the ones to the left are.
I'm not a birder.
Yeah, that's why they make field guides. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite a savant that way. I can spot the usual suspects, but the rare and elusives are. That's why I got the apps and stuff.
Yeah. So again, this prairie right now is roughly maybe 2 foot or tall or so.
I would say so. And that
come September, how big we're gonna get?
Depending on where you're at, the access to moisture, the history of fire and grazing in an area, I would say tallgrass hike could be, strike zone, knees to shoulders. With some areas, like along a river or a stream valley, you could easily see 6 feet high, head high. But if you're on an outcrop or a high point, ankle high is probably all you should expect. And that's just the way the prairie rolled, the tallgrass prairie rolls. It's very adaptive to whatever conditions are out there. in the midst of kind of droughts in the region. We've had some good rainfall lately. A lot of it's run away. We get a lot of flash flooding out here from time to time, and so the averages say you got this, but then why am I still dry? Like, well, most of that average rainfall just simply ran away, ran into the creeks and ran out of the region. So, but the root systems of the prairie plants can retain moisture very, very well, and that helps sustain the landscape through the droughty times. And as cruel as it sounds, such stress and strain and challenge actually in the main, in the long term, serve to benefit the ecosystem as a whole, because those plants and animals that can adapt to that sort of challenging landscape are the ones that will continue to grow. And those plants, animals, and yes, people who are unable to accommodate the changes, well, they disappear.
Yeah.
So yes, like I said, nature is, as we were saying earlier, it's called an ecosystem and not an ego system. I mean, there is no accommodation made for human needs or desires. Nature is striving for balance, and among the life forms, whatever form that life takes is, of course, an open question. And whether or not we humans will be part of that answer, well, you know, that's an ongoing debate.
Yes.
So,
And it will be ongoing.
Yeah, it's a lot of kind of cultural reckoning going on, and like, how are we going to make our way upon this planet, which is the only one close enough that's even the only one we know that can sustain our version of life as we know it.
Yeah.
Unless you want to live in a double wide trailer 100 million miles from home, live in Mars or something like that, live in an artificial landscape or whatever. So
Now, before this became the Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve, it was a ranch or a farm?
it was a ranch. It began life in 1878 when the Stephen F. Jones and Louisa Jones family came to Kansas from Colorado with the expressed purpose to continue in their lives as cattle operators. He was about 52 when they arrived. She was about 46. So right there, you are telling a different story than the little house covered wagon kind of overland trail. This was like the next generation, kind of at the fulcrum, the tipping point between the open range, the quote-unquote Wild West, which probably wasn't as wild as Hollywood made it out to be, and the more settled and stable and established way of life that is still the way of life out here today. So 1878, the Joneses came with money to spend and with knowledge and age and experience in how to spend it. Spent $25,000 on the main house.
Wow.
Another $15,000 on the barn and outbuildings.
You ever extrapolate that to what it would have been cost today?
Yeah, and you can go to Google, go to your inflation calculator and plump that up. I think the money they came with, $100,000, I think equates to $2 million today. And I think $25,000 is something like $750,000. But of course, if you had to rebuild that house with $750,000, I don't think you'd get more than a couple of walls.
No, it's a beautiful house.
Before you could get even close to what we have now. So they came, they saw, they expanded, they acquired about 7,000 acres, which is, we take that for granted. The buying and selling of land is a huge deal. But back then, buying property, well, that was a big deal. Purchasing land, the closure of the open range. Many folks are kind of came out into the Wild West, the quote-unquote Wild West, to make a living on that open range. Didn't require the purchase of land or really a lot of capital up front. They just hook up with a cattle crew and then just do their thing. But as time went on and money became spent, as the business became more lucrative, and as railroads started to crisscross the countryside, especially the Atchison, the Topeka, and the Santa Fe, that really revolutionized the cattle business, because no longer did you have to track a herd from somewhere in Texas up to Abilene or Wichita, Dodge City in Kansas, a dangerous trek. You could just stick them on a railroad car and ship them to market.
Right.
And that's what they were doing before they got to Kansas. They were established a large ranch near La Junta, Colorado, along the Santa Fe Trail, which rapidly became the Santa Fe Railroad. And all of a sudden, they could now ship their cattle to markets in Kansas City, Omaha, Chicago. And then finally, they came to the realization that, well, why don't we just build a ranch in that big green swath there in Kansas, and just raise them in the state itself, because quarantine laws were starting to take effect that were affecting the importation of cattle. Tick. Ugh. So just raise them in state and you won't have to worry about those quarantine laws. So, and the Flint Hills were tailor-made for grazing animals. Lots and lots of grass. Of course, that grass was grazed by buffalo, bison, which were by 1872 totally wiped out of the state.
Really?
There were no wild bison by the early 1870s, which roughly coincides with the other dark thread that runs through our red, white, and blue, and that is the wholesale kind of transformation and removal of the indigenous peoples of the area, the Pawnee, the Osage, the Wichita, and the Kansa, for whom our state gets its name. In one of the more kind of ironic bits of history, the Kansa, I mean, the state is named for the Kansa, but 11 years after the state was established, the Kansa were more or less removed from it.
Wow.
They were hemmed in to reservation lands in and around Council Grove, Kansas, and little by little those lands got whittled away until by the early 1870s the CAW agency, KAW, if I understand my timelines correct, was open to all settlement, which means the Kansa no longer had a home specific to them in Kansas. So, but they were, I guess, offered, I don't know, kind of in a very Corleone sort of way, offered space down in Indian Territory, now of course called Oklahoma, right next to the Osage Nation. Which between the two of them, they have the last bits of the Flint Hills as they exist in Oklahoma, where they're called the Osage Hills. So,
well, let's back up to the Joneses a little bit.
Sure. Yeah.
How many cattle did they run here at the height of their empire?
Let's see. Oh man, you almost stumped the chump here. I think maybe in the neighborhood of 1,000, 1,200. I mean, they weren't like, this wasn't like a feedlot of 500,000.
Yeah.
This was entirely self-sustaining on those acres. So 30 miles of limestone fence was constructed to contain and separate those acres into pastures. And then they would also raise in the bottomlands, like the crops, the plant life that a ranch would need. The corn, the beans, the what have you. They had orchards there. So down in the bottomland, immediately across from the ranch complex. So and they had water, hence the name of the original name of the ranch, Spring Hill Farm and Stock Ranch. A spring was channeled into a cistern, which provided ample water for use within the house and provided the location, the location of the house in close proximity to that spring. So they had their water needs nailed down, they had their crop growing needs nailed down, they had the upland cattle grazing needs nailed down. Not something every young family in a covered wagon could pull off.
Sounds like a sweet deal.
Sweet deal. It was again, kind of a recognition of yes, there's opportunities here, we should take advantage of them. But again, the flip side always must be acknowledged. The cost of that freedom was not borne entirely by the Joneses. Yeah, that the phrase "freedom isn't free" comes into play, especially this week. They came here after the bison had been removed, after pretty much all the indigenous land was divided up. So they came about 5-6 years after all that happened. So something to at least acknowledge, at the very least.
Yeah. So the prairie, the Tallgrass Prairie that the Park Service maintains, preserves, was basically the Jones cattle grazing all that and grazed it down?
Correct. Yeah, the Joneses grazed 7,000 of the park's acres, and then the remaining acres belonged to his southern neighbor, a family by the name of Lantry, Barney and Bridget Lantry. They were involved in the other big business in Chase County, which is limestone quarry. So the two main natural resources of Chase County are the grass and what's below it. I guess you could boil it, the rock, the limestone. So today's bound, and then in 1888, 10 years after arriving in the state, Stephen and Louisa finally sell the ranch to their southern neighbor, the Lantrys.
Didn't stick around for long.
Didn't stay, well, the history, I mean, it's great, it's kind of great fun to speculate. I mean, don't let a lack of facts get in the way of a good story. And, Never. And I mean, I make the joke, they weren't posting their every move to Instagram or Facebook or even diaries or letters. I mean, the 19th century social media if they were writing the letters, they haven't been found. But we do know by 1888, he was in his mid-60s. His wife was right behind him. Their young daughter, the fifth of 5 children, had finished her 8th grade education at the Lower Fox Creek Schoolhouse, and so maybe all of those things combined inspired them to move to Kansas City in 1886. And then 2 years later, 88, they sell the ranch. There were other economic winds blowing at that time. Weather was a factor. I believe there were blizzards in 86, 87, 88 that affected cattle life quite significantly, and then the inevitable patterns of supply and demand economics were kicking in by the late 1880s and 90s, and there was a lot of shakeout and a lot of speculation, which led to economic instabilities.
Well, just as a short interlude, I think it was one of those blizzards that convinced Charles Buffalo Jones that maybe cattle weren't the best livestock out here.
I mean, they probably, they saw that. I mean, cattle aren't even native to the Western Hemisphere, so they are imports themselves, Spanish imports, in fact. So And they brought with them all of their Spanish European habits and physiologies and such, and they're transplanted to a whole nother continent with similar but not identical. And then over the years, domestication does kind of take out a lot of that survivability,
Yeah.
which bison still more or less maintain. Some of those habits and some of those physiologies. I mean, and being the native grazer, they've got a lot of those things, a lot of that hardwired in. A lot of the hardware and the wetware is right there, tailor-made for this kind of environment. So whether or not there can be some kind of hybrid that can combine the best of both, I think efforts in the late 1800s managed to combine the worst of both and managed to kind of muddy the genome a little bit with cattle genetics.
And Buffalo Jones was one of the forerunners of that hybridization experiment that went awry. And I think some of the bison on the north rim of the Grand Canyon today contain some of those cattle genes, and some of them actually exhibit some cattle appearances that they used to.
Yeah,
I've seen some pretty bizarre pictures.
I know. I was about to say, I think I remember seeing a picture and I'm like, man, that is Franken-cow right there. It looked like it was built from spare parts from a slaughterhouse floor or something.
But coming forward, you've got the bison on the preserve that the TNC, Nature Conservancy, maintains, and that is intended to preserve pure bison genetics, if possible.
If possible, yeah. And of course, genetic testing is getting more and more precise, and so perhaps they'll pick out other islands of genetic purity out there. Sounds kind of creepy when you say it that way, but yeah, these bison are kind of super cool, super important to that whole species maintenance project that dates back well into the late 19th century with efforts by William T. Hornaday, Theodore Roosevelt, and other like-minded folks who had not only the bully pulpit, the social status, but they had the pockets that were deep enough to kind of begin to acquire some bison where they could still be found.
Let's not forget Charles Goodnight.
There you go, Charles Goodnight. Yeah, they were. There were people recognizing finally that, well, maybe human activity. We've got the whole subdue and dominate thing down pretty well. Maybe we need to exercise some restraint and stewardship. Far more difficult habits to cultivate. So, but they were making the effort, and fortunately, they were close enough to the levers of power that they could kind of begin to move the needle far more than any other Joe Blow from Kokomo. But they were able to sequester some bison at the Bronx Zoo in New York City, waiting for an occasion to come up sometime in a distant future, unpredictable, where these bison could be reintroduced. Sounds pretty simple, right? To our eyes and ears, we hear stuff like that every day. But back then, that was a fairly radical notion of animal reintroduction, restoration, the beginnings of some of the first stirrings of the modern environmental activism movement. Awareness that all life is affected by all other life in some fashion. So about 1907, you might want to correct me on that, when Wind Cave National Park was established, those bison were transferred.
Well, and what's really interesting, you have to wonder, I mean, Hornaday was good friends with President Roosevelt, and he basically convinced Roosevelt to get behind the bison movement, and Hornaday said, here's the deal, you give us the land, we'll give you the bison. And so that's that first, actually I think the first one went out to Wichita, Wichita Mountain National Wildlife
Oklahoma,
Refuge.
or what became Oklahoma, yeah.
And then the Wind Cave.
Yeah, that's there's politics for you. I mean, and that's not to denigrate politics. I mean, people combining together for a shared purpose. I guess that's the ideal of politics, but
when it works it.
The execution thereof can be a bit thorny, but I guess they were at least trying. And recognizing that one life form's activities would ripple out and affect the activities of other ones. So those bison came to Wind Cave, and then fast forward about 100 years to 2009, the park received its first bison.
Tallgrass Prairie.
Tallgrass Prairie received its bison from Wind Cave as kind of an extension of that long-running restoration species maintenance efforts. So it's kind of cool that little old Kansas, land of Dorothy, Toto, and tornadoes, yes, I've heard the jokes, can also be a place where there's some like cutting edge species preservation going on. And having an isolated herd like this, if some sort of tragedy should befall the Wind Cave herd, it gets sick, a pandemic, perish the thought, and that herd should be injured in some way, the animals here at Tallgrass could be utilized kind of as a storehouse of genetic information, so to help rebuild a sickened herd or something like that. So
you zoom out a little bit, and it's thought that at the beginning of the 19th century, estimates of 50, 60, maybe 70 million bison were on the landscape, and we probably had that 140 million acres of tallgrass prairie. And now you zoom forward to the 21st century, and there might be 500,000 bison.
There you go. That's
in
pretty
North
close
America.
to our number. The number I throw out there, 500,000. Yeah.
And very small number of those are in conservation herds.
There you go. Oh,
like
man,
the one here.
We are on the same page. Yeah. Very small. 5%. Would that be could I get away with that? 5% in conservation care, the other 95 in not conservation care.
Meat production.
Meat production. There you go. That's what I tell folks, and they give me a bit of a sour look, and I'm like, yeah, it's no fun getting out of bed in the morning, is it? You get exposed to all these kind of uncomfortable facts, and you may want to go back home and crawl under your bed if you want to avoid all of this.
What's interesting is you go back to the administration of, I think, President George W. Bush, and Interior Secretary Kempthorne launched the Bison Initiative in the Interior Department and the Park Service, and I think that was in 2007 or so, 2006.
Right.
And you come forward to today, and they're studying their genetics, and they're coming up with a map and trying to figure out where else can we put conservation herds on the public lands in the West.
Yeah, good luck. Bison are not dachshunds, they're not easily handled animals, and not every acre in the West is suitable, you know. So it's a real challenge finding landscape that can indeed be, because owning is the easy part. Acquiring is the easy part. Owning is the tricky part. Many people have learned that buying a bison is far different than maintaining it on your 1 acre farm. They tend to bust out of things when they get too jammed up, and then you get a knock on the door from the local sheriff saying, please do something with your animal or we will.
Yeah. So if you can't make it out to Yellowstone National Park or Grand Teton and you want to see some bison, come over to Tallgrass Prairie.
Come over to Tallgrass Prairie. It will require some work.
A little exercise.
The herd is maintained. The larger part of that pasture is about a half a mile from the visitor center complex. So
Half a mile walk.
half a mile walk to enter the pasture, and then you're kind of at you're living on their time and place. So they may in fact show up, be grazing right at the front door, right at the front gate, and you can check off the bison box right away. Or they might make you work for it a little more, and they might make you work for it and then you not see them at all.
Yeah.
That is, again, getting out of bed can be quite inconvenient sometimes.
But at the same time, I mean, what is it, roughly 2 square miles that your
2
herd?
square miles, yeah. And some of that acreage, about 200 of it, again, was opened up near a parking area by the Lower Fox Creek Schoolhouse, so which is only a mile's walk or drive from the visitor center complex. So if everything aligns just so, you might be able to drive to the schoolhouse and catch a glimpse of some brown dots on the horizon with broad shoulders, and boom, you've seen the bison.
Yeah. Well, but it just goes to show you that you don't need a large swath of land to maintain a conservation herd of bison.
No, yeah, you don't need tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres. If the numbers of bison are kept small enough and the area is kept large enough, you can maintain a calm and predictable environment. And as all animals are, even humans, we are reflections of our environment, more or less. And for those bison especially, if that environment was cramped and constant irritation from vehicles, overcrowded with buffalo, what have you, their behavior could get a little unpredictable. And all you got to do is go to YouTube, bison at Yellowstone, and boom, you could probably find all sorts of videos to prove that point.
Yeah.
But out here, I think these bison have become accustomed to their environment and what happens within it, up to a point. I mean, we still tell people, please maintain. I mean, if we get anything out of this pandemic, it'll be distancing. Distance is good.
Distance is good.
Whether you're a teeny tiny coronavirus or a 2,000-pound rutting bull bison, keep your distance. We tend to say, I think they say at Yellowstone 25 yards, but we say 100.
On the safe side.
On the safe side, that's right. But again, all I have is a sternly wagged finger. I have no other juice on me to make the point. So please heed the words. Keep a distance. Give them room. Use a Zoom. That sort of thing. Let them do what you came to see them do.
Yeah.
It's eat, sleep, and do their bison thing. Yeah.
Well, Eric, thanks so much for the walking tour to Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve. It's a fascinating place. I guess I'm going to have to come back in the fall when the tall grass is taller and maybe still in bloom.
Please do, yeah. I mean, there'll be some flowers. Generally, springtime is a good time to see shorter plant life because the grasses haven't really awakened yet. But then July and August, the tables turn. The shorter forbs and flowers get overshadowed by the taller grassy plant life, and then by September, usually the grasses have become far more identifiable. Right now, it's just anonymous blades. So you need like a doctorate in biology, a doctorate in botany, and a magnifying glass to tell one species from another almost. But yeah, they'll get taller out here. I would say waist high along the Southwind Trail. It's a good place to rewind, to kind of let your mind kind of scramble around a little bit, relax a bit. It's a place to put your wellness money where your mouth is. People are saying, I need to get away from it all. I need to relax. I need to turn off my phone. This is where you do it.
Yeah, great place. All right, well, thanks again, Eric.
You're most welcome. Thank you for coming.
That's our show for this week. We hope you enjoyed it. In the coming weeks, I'll take you to Homestead National Historical Park in southeastern Nebraska and Fort Larned National Historic Site in west central Kansas. For The Traveler, this is Kurt Rebenchek. See you in the parks.
The Yosemite Conservancy helps visitors connect with Yosemite through adventures, volunteering, and the arts. It's the only nonprofit dedicated to supporting Yosemite National Park and funds grants to improve trails, restore habitat, protect wildlife, and inspire the next generation of nature lovers. Learn more at yosemite.org. The Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation is the primary nonprofit fundraising partner for the Blue Ridge Parkway. It is made up of people who have a deep love for this majestic road and want to ensure that its natural beauty and the experiences it offers endure for generations to come. Show your appreciation at brpfoundation.org. Whether it be strategy, business planning, change management, board development, executive search, or diversity planning, Potrero Group is here to help. They mix a depth of experience in the parks and land space with the breadth of best practices from other industries. For more information or to schedule a preliminary conversation, go to potrerogroup.com. Potrero group.com. Full of stunning photography and thought-provoking reads, Smoky's Life is a biannual magazine produced by Great Smoky Mountains Association. Members receive it free of charge each spring and fall, and it is available for purchase in retail stores throughout Great Smoky Mountains National Park and online at smokiesinformation.org. Washington State is graced with 3 spectacular national parks, each different and special in their own unique ways. As the official nonprofit partner and the only philanthropic organization dedicated exclusively to supporting these parks through charitable contributions, Washington's National Park Fund has a mission to raise private support to deepen everyone's love for, understanding of, and experiences in Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Olympic National Parks. Share your passion for these parks at WNPF.org. The composers and musicians at Orange Tree Productions have created a unique collection known as the National Park Series that has grown to include more than 30 CD titles. Composed against the backdrop of a park's sounds of nature, these musical scores will connect you with these beautiful places and take you there, at least in your mind. This collection is the #1 selling national park audio series in the world and provides the background music for National Parks Travelers podcasts. Visit them at orangetreeproductions.com. Editing and production work for the National Parks Traveler podcast is done by Splitbeard Productions. You can learn more about us at splitbeardproductions.com. National Parks Traveler is a 501c3 nonprofit media organization that provides daily editorial coverage of national parks and protected areas. Traveler's coverage is made possible by reader and listener donations. Visit nationalparkstraveler.org.